You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. This week's a bit of a different format. So a lot of you are familiar with Jimbob. He's got Made by Jimbob. He does the hilarious, wonderfully done memes. He's got books full of his memes. His artwork, they make me laugh. They poke fun at a lot of the absurdity that's going on in society at the moment. So I think you guys will enjoy that if you don't know it already. Madebijimbob.com. He also does really good live streams many times a week. And he and I got to talking, and he wanted me to come on a live stream. Well, and I wanted him to come on this podcast. So to kill two birds with one stone, I went on his live stream, and he's letting me use that for this week's episode. We have a good back and forth, and I think you guys are going to like it. Before we get to it, don't forget that club I told you about, patreon.com/counterflow. $5 or more per month gets you into this club where we will do monthly Zoom calls. We have one coming up the 23rd of February at 7 p.m. Central. My guest will be Vin Armani, aka Cyprian, where we will discuss the demonic nature of AI. Things are getting really weird. I'm sure y'all have noticed that. We're going to have a good discussion on that. It's going to be open to any of you guys who are in this exclusive club to ask Vin questions, ask me questions, chime in with your thoughts on a lot of what we do. That will be this Thursday, the 23rd. If you're in the $5 or more per month club, you'll get the link sent to you, and hope you guys can join us. It's going to be good. So let's just get right to this. This is my appearance on Jimbob's live stream this past week. And like I said, we're going to use it for this week's episode. Hope you guys enjoy it.
Hello, Buck.
Hello, Jimbob. How are you?
I'm doing good. You sound perfect. Thank you for jumping on. Everybody, welcome, Buck. I need to make a welcome emoji so that everyone can do a welcome emoji.
Yes.
So give us a quick intro so I don't flub it up. Give us a little quick intro for you and a background.
Okay. My name is Buck Johnson. I host the Counterflow Podcast. I've been doing that since 2018, where at first it was strictly political. It was actually called Death to Tyrants, and it came from an anarcho-capitalist perspective, and I basically covered politics. And along the way, over these few years, I switched the name to Counterflow for a myriad of reasons, really. And I wanted to break away from strictly ANCAP politics, and my views started changing. And so did my spiritual views. I was agnostic. And as I got closer and closer to what we now call the truth, the Orthodox Church, some of my programming, much of my programming has shifted into that direction, not necessarily by design, but just because as you know, I talk about what I find interesting, and I hope the audience finds it interesting as well. And so that's kind of the path I've headed down. And aside from that, I'm a lieutenant in a fire department, which will go unnamed because I'm not allowed to say that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I've been doing that for 25 years. And I live in Lockhart, Texas, small little town outside of Austin.
Well, great. Thanks for that intro. Way better than anything I would have said. And for jumping on. Yeah. So I was just about to say, the last 3 years has three and a half maybe has really started pushing people into different directions. So the first response to say the nonsense that we all experienced 3 years ago is that you immediately go to supply chains, your income, a lot of worldly things. In fact, a lot of these sort of operations push people into very worldly positions, right? And it's not that we reject that the reality of the world, that we have to eat, that we have to provide, that we have to do these things. But it is interesting that once we got through that, so we all use different resources and communities to sort of get through this 3 years of a thumb pressing on us. But now that we're sort of coming out of at least one of the phases, I think they're going to keep doing this kind of stuff. But once we come out, what I'm experiencing with myself and a lot of people in my community here is that men especially are looking for something that's unchanging. That's not a response, not a response. And that's a really good distinction that I've come to, is that yes, we do respond to things. Yes, we do react. But what is the part of our lives that are not a reaction, that are just a constant participation? And that's honestly, that's what's pushed me into Orthodoxy for sure. And I think everyone's dealing with this, especially men who lead families, who lead communities. There's this wrestling with this question. What am I practicing? What's unified among men that we practice? It ends up being a bigger question than how do we fight the beastly system, or how do we say no to Fauci's? And these are all important questions, but it seems like now we're on, in my view, a higher order of questions. Do you see that?
Yeah, for sure. In 2020 and in the following year or two is kind of what I think led a lot of us to that, because especially being agnostic, I looked at everything as a materialist and kind of power struggles within strictly governmental and power structures of the society we live in. So in other words, if we had less government, these bad things wouldn't happen. There's no, and you try to look back historically and say, see, when the government was smaller, things were better. And so to look at it through that lens, it hit me early in 2020. If that's the only way you see this whole thing, you're going to miss the point. Because there's actual, at the time, I didn't know it was called spiritual warfare, but it is. So I started looking past just the material and trying to figure out what are these entities that are driving all of this. And I think unless you start going past the material to look into that, you're kind of getting lost in the muck of it all and just kind of getting steamrolled.
Right. And then you get stuck politically in these kind of like, the Alex Jones has the info wars, and then Ben Shapiro has the culture wars. But you're always asking, well, what's above that, right? What precedes culture? Because, the famous Breitbart saying is that politics is downstream from culture, and we all agree. But it seemed like nobody was quite asking the question necessarily in the mainstream, especially, well, what's culture downstream? And that simple question ends up revealing what we're all talking about today, which goes beyond a self-sustaining existence, a homestead life, a rural life. These are all things that are preferable to the beastly operating system that is like the oncoming smart cities and whatnot. But there's something more. There's something more that we're seeking to participate in, and and a lot of us can definitely relate. I came out of that. I jumped off the sinking default liberal democratic ship when I was in Los Angeles when I left. And then the safety raft is sort of like this libertarian anarchist position where nobody can blame you for anything because you're not a big ship and, you think for yourself and you're unique. And then you realize that there's no cohesion there and they can't account for moral degeneracy.
Right.
Because
a lot of them push it.
A lot. Yeah, they justify it.
It's also it's a safe place. And I say this not to knock them, but because I was part of that. And it's a safe place to go, see, there's no way to prove what I'm saying will ever happen or will ever be correct because it's not going to happen. So it's a safe haven to sit on the sidelines and go, well, if you would have just listened to me and we had no government, we'd all be better. Can't prove me wrong.
Right.
And so there's an issue with that too. And it provides kind of a false shelter to hide behind and throw bombs at everyone else and try to win arguments.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good safety between the sinking ships. You're like, oh, we're the raft. We're the cool raft. And then once you start looking at like moral problems, spiritual issues, you realize that they don't have an answer. The Ayn Randian philosophy has no answer for these more subtle but very impactful. What I mean by that is behaviors can be very subtle and accumulative in a society and not break any laws and completely degrade the society. So lawfulness ends up being this question of like, well, what's informing law? And then you realize, wow, I was wrong that there is such a thing as a neutral ethical position, or a neutral ethical position from a government's perspective. So it's either going to be informed by a cohesive, put together theology, or it's going to be a counterfeit, broken theology. And I think that's what is kind of happening, is that humanism, technocrats, atheists, secularism, mixed with some maybe new age stuff, is taking over some of the institutions. And we're pretending that these things are supposed to be separate, or that they can be separated. And I don't think they can. I mean, did you come out of that phase too, where you're like, yeah, we gotta, be your own person, be a libertarian, and then, keep all these ideologies out of the government. And you realize like we're human beings.
Correct.
The government's made of human beings. So what does that even mean?
And the powers that be will take advantage of people like that too, because it's like you mentioned, you can have aggression without having a law. So libertarians will often say, well, as long as you don't hurt anyone or take their things, that's the state that does that. And so we're against the state. But everyone else, as long as you play by this non-aggression principle, we're cool. Or evil powers will bend that as far as they can, to where a libertarian can keep saying, well, technically that's not aggression. And before you know it, you're sitting in a room by yourself and they're controlling everything you do. Because a lot of the times over 2020, things that happened that I saw as a negative weren't specifically aggression either, right? A lot of it was playing on our lust for comfort and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
And so that's not aggression. Now, to keep you locked down is, and to say you can't work, sure. But there's people that I know personally that were like, I hope the lockdowns don't end. I'm kind of liking working from home, and I don't really want to go out and see people. And I get fast food delivered to my place. Like, none of that's aggression, but that sounds closer and closer to a hell on earth, in my personal opinion.
Absolutely. People, that part where you just deliver people, you match them with supply, you match their appetites, their lusts, their worldly desires, and that you don't need slavery. That is slavery. That's the thing about this assumption that force and tyranny, yeah, we don't like it, but you don't need it. That's kind of what we saw in the last 3 years. You don't need it. You don't need it. You just give people what they want, and then make their existence conditional on that exchange. And then people just give me my fix, give me my thing, whatever it is. And so from that perspective, yes, the first step would be, the first step is spiritual. Is that look out for where you're dominated by your appetites, right? Right. And whether you're seeking and getting, seeking the spiritual hospital, or are you going to it? This kind of thing ends up being important to be, otherwise you become blind to the things that can control you, and you become a slave to yourself. You're a slave to your own intellect, a slave to your own appetites. And slavery is at the highest level, slavery ends up being a form of self-worship, which is kind of ironic, where you become your own God, you're also your own slave.
Yes.
And we see that a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and within that Ayn Rand style of thinking, I see it often. A lot of people through my libertarian phase have friended me on social media, so they've kind of they've stayed stuck where they were, and I'll see their posts about anti-religious stuff and anti-God, and it's so obvious once you get out of that perspective, like, no, you have that too. You're your God, or your individual freedom is your God. Because worship doesn't necessarily mean we have to get down on our knees or do prostrations or kiss an icon. Worship, whatever you think about the most in life, is essentially what you're worshiping. So if you consider yourself an atheist, which I at this point don't think there's such a thing, if you consider yourself that, just look at what's most important in your life, because typically, and I guess I am trying to stereotype, I'll throw a blanket generalization, but they're not married with kids very often. And so they're single people worshiping their own freedom, their will to do whatever they want, whatever makes them feel good, their hedonism. And so if you can step back and see what's going on, that's kind of a bit worse form of slavery, so to speak. That's more slavery than respecting the hierarchy within a church and the church, I should say, and fasting and prostrations and prayer. That's not being a slave at all. That's giving yourself over to a bigger power that is there. Right. So you might as well do it.
Yeah. The idolatry goes the other way too, where you can see what people idolize, their own wants, their own needs, their own intellect. But then people can actually idolize something that is actually good. And this gets into interesting territory. So, for instance, if you're doing well with your family and you have, your health and there's love and there's laughter and everything's going well, people can actually start idolizing something that actually is grounded fundamentally in God, but is not God. And that is a form of creation, worshiping a creation. People can fall to idolatry of their own family, in a sense, their own wife, their own kids, where they become nearly identical to the closest thing they have to God, right? And it comes from a good place too, but it's a very subtle thing that could happen. And people, things like that go unchecked most of the time because you're still in a sense of feeling good. Like you're like, oh, I love my family. I love all of this. And if it's going well, that means you're good with God. It's almost like a don't ask, don't tell, right? Yes. Negotiation. And then when something goes wrong, people then, you could fall into this relationship with this sort of vague deistic God you don't participate in with other than not doing bad things. And then when something happens, you kind of reflect and go, well, I must have done something bad. And this is a false paradigm. This is not a participation ongoing. This is like a monopoly game of sorts with God, where you're like, I'm going to do this, and then this will produce. It's like a form of a prosperity gospel in a way.
I was just going to use that term.
Even if you don't go to a church, a big super church that's promising you stuff, you're doing negotiations, and it becomes maybe in the end it's just that's where you can actually point to superstition, because it's all just kind of like based on the external world, right? It's almost doing natural theology without all of the foundation for what that would actually mean. And I see that a lot because, people have actually a justified position to be skeptical of most modern churches that are dominant in American culture.
Yes, and I'm skeptical of them. And right. It's interesting because I assume you've had this experience too, where Orthodoxy, for me, 3 years ago, not even in my lexicon, I didn't know what it was. I had never even given it any thought. And so once you jump into this world of Orthodox Christianity and you start speaking to, let's say, kind of a non-denominational American church going, sometimes not, sometimes going to church person, they'll throw these jabs at you. And those are really jabs at what I used to think Christianity was.
Right.
And I hear a lot of this if we talk about any of the dogma within the Orthodox Church, which there's not much compared to, what a lot of people would think. I'll still hear someone say, well, that's man's rule. Oh, that man said that. And I've heard that more recently than I used to ever hear it. But I was very proud to hear a Protestant friend of mine tell me, I told her, one of the things I pray for is patience because I lack it and I need more of that. And she goes, I don't know if you should be praying for patience. And I said, I think we should. Why don't you think so? And she goes, because I've learned that when you do, he throws a lot more situations at you to practice the patience.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of the struggle that we talk about within Orthodoxy. So yes, you are correct, but that's the tests that you're being put through.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Especially like under the umbrella that is now Christianity to most people, where it's just like a giant umbrella, and then there's different products on the shelf. That's kind of how a lot of people are inherit that view when they're born. They it's like you choose. It's like a choice. It's like, oh, I like this because of these reasons and whatnot. And then we start fighting. What's kind of called infighting. What would be infighting in politics? And I think it's absolutely necessary because I don't know about you, but the clear, it's old, right? It goes back all the way to the beginning of the church. But in the modern sense, that this kind of like freedom fighting truther community, that I'm mostly saturated in, it starts from this like really pure rejection of a false authority. So it starts from something good, and then it's you expand it out, and the more gnosis you find, right, then you reject even more authority until you get to this point where all authority is skeptical. You should be like that. None of it can be listened to, and so and I think that's where we are now. I think that whole sort of conjoined community of like truther, freedom fighters, health, like the health movement. It's all in this kind of sphere that is rejecting probably the right things to reject, but at the same time they're rejecting all things, and so now we're in this point of like, well, what are we practicing, and what's the authority, and what's the normative structure? And it's almost like a rejection of all of it together. And now these are lost. In my view, this is a lost position, right? You lost a position.
I'm glad you used the term gnosis, because there's a Gnostic quality within the truther movement and the truther at large movement. Of course, I grew up in it, so I still think of strictly the number before 10 and the number after 10. But I know it's broadened since then. But if you keep going down that path without spiritual guidance, I suppose, you get into almost where you're a postmodernist, and there literally is nothing real and nothing is true. And it's funny how it comes back around to these French postmodernist thinkers that initially a lot of truther and freedom fighters were completely against, but they're so buried in this material worldview of, well, that's fake. Oh, that guy's fake. Oh, that was a lie. Oh, this is fake. And at some point, there's what's true to you anymore. There isn't. There's no such thing.
Right. And it's always changing. And that's like you can identify if you're pursuing gnosis, if you come to this notion that you're a part of a revolution. I think that's a fair way to approach it. Might not be always the case, but I think it's a good tool. If you find yourself turning, right, from a road and you're using knowledge to keep yourself turning and always rebelling against something, you're going in a circle. You're not actually on a straight, narrow path. You're actually, because the fight is staying on a path, actually, not how to avoid other things, right? You stay on a path. The challenge is not going off a narrow path. The challenge isn't how do I choose my own adventure through this matrix thing, because then you're just lost in an endless maze. And I think that, that whole truther kind of movement, the freedom fighter movement, all of that ends up, if you don't have home base, if you don't have the legend on the map, if you don't have the meaning and the directions, which need to account for your metaphysics, your knowledge, your epistemology, and your morality. If you don't have those on the map as part of the legend, you're just going to follow like trends. And you end up, like you said, you just go in a full circle, because a revolution is a full circle, right?
Yes.
It's the bending away from, or you just continue that. It actually does go in a circle. So that pursuit of knowledge, the distinction really, like, nobody can quite identify what, let's say Gnosticism is, because now today there's like these weird strands and tied to New Age and tied to all this other stuff. But like in a sense, you can reduce it to whether you're idolizing knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? Over obedience, by the way. It's not. So you're always in this tension between where you're valuing knowledge of man, knowledge of the world over obedience and practice. And I think I just saw, another truther. It was in response to like the Owen debate with the Trinity, and it had like 12 people on a panel. Maybe 2 were like defending Trinitarianism. I don't know from what view. The rest were kind of Unitarianism, oneness kind of thing. And out of all the particular things they're arguing, I had that all in my mind, what I would say. But from a wider view, I started to question, wow, what's an interesting question is, I wonder if any of these people who actually agree on the sort of the unity approach do the same practice at all. If they actually have this share of praxis. And I don't think they would.
Right.
And that's something that's blatantly obvious and important to man. Is
Yes.
like, how do we practice and participate? And I don't know. I do this ritual in the morning in the bath, and I do this other thing, and I go out with my daughter and we blow the things off the flowers, and that's participation in God. And you go, okay, well, then the question ends up being whether is there a right or wrong way to participate? Is there a right or wrong way to interpret scripture? Is there a right or wrong way to worship? And if you say no, then you must accept all things.
Uh-huh.
If you say yes, then you've accepted an authority. And there's you can't, maybe there's some magnitude, right, in between. And we're talking about the fullness of something, right? How do you practice the fullness? I wouldn't argue that some person doesn't I can't say someone isn't participating in God, right? In some way. But the question is, if there is a wrong way, then there's a right way. And this is always the question I go to with people when they start to go into a relativist paradigm where they're determining for themselves arbitrarily if what's right or wrong based on the outcome, which is consequentialism. And I just fundamentally reject that, because then drinking children's blood is pragmatic to some people, right? So what are you going to argue? You're going to go to the Bible? What parts are you going to take out now? Like, it just opens up a big wormhole. And I don't think, for the most part, the kind of truther sphere is really confronting this problem head on.
No, because I think there's not enough, like you're kind of hinting at, there's not enough cohesion amongst them in this particular thing. The cohesion is the generalized powers that be are lying to us.
Right.
And a lot of them will include church in that. And in some regard, I understand why, because there has been throughout Catholicism and the Vatican, and there's obviously been CIA infiltration and issues like that. But unfortunately, the evil powers that want these truthers to write off God completely, that's the kind of stuff they'll put in their way. And again, you're seeing it through material eyes. And so you're applying your truther sensibilities to something that should be much bigger than you. And you're just putting it in another category of, that's a lie.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Jeremy. Protestants of culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. You're just kind of like, what is it? It's like a sola, whatever the external reality is. You get to interpret for yourself. You're reading what the reality is and where it should go. So you don't get away from this. You don't get away from the potential of solipsism, basically, and nihilism, as you said. It all leads to epistemic nihilism, where you can't know anything. Like I had one guy, this guy I kind of make fun of all the time, Jaronism. He started his own creed and whatnot. And he made this statement that if it's true, it wouldn't be everywhere. Or like, if the Bible was true, why would they put it in every, hotel drawer or whatever? You know what I mean? And this is just such a kind of a lazy take, but I understand it from that perspective of like pure gnosis. No practice, just pure gnosis. Like then you're in a war of information constantly. So you're just comparing information constantly. And you, in that position, only you could be the authority. At some point, you reject all external authority, and which is interesting. And I tried to bring this up during the debate, but it's a little abstract. Is that if you reject that God has a body, right? Not like as a church, but as a person, right? That shows himself, and he remains uniquely single-personed and out there, not accessible directly in any real way. Then it makes sense you would reject the body, the church. So if you reject the physical body of God that manifests and that story, it makes sense as a consequence you would reject an extension of that body, which would be a church, which would then be an authority and so forth. But it's interesting that the unit that approach, the single Godhead, person Godhead, leads only to yourself as the arbiter of things. Why? Because your standard, even if you believe in this God, the standard itself is only self-referencing. It's only one person, so he can only love himself. there's no possibility of humility. How does a single
Right.
God express and demonstrate humility without lowering himself as
That's
a second
key.
person?
That part's key, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, I should have actually in the debate should have went with humility instead of love. I thought love was pretty much a strong argument for a relational Godhead, but humility is even a bigger defeater to Unitarianism, because if the very being of God ontologically grounds humility and love and all the other things, this is pretty much my argument against Islam, that it can't ground humility at all. There's no demonstration of it. It embodied in the being. It's not like he did something and that's humility, right? It's the embodiment. It needs to be ontological, not descriptive of things occurring, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thing with just general, and I don't know Unitarianism, how vast it goes as far as what kind of gods people are claiming. But these fundamental questions reveal that there's not many worldviews.
Right. And to humility, really quick, the inverse, of course, is pride. And there's a lot of pride in the thought that you're presenting that they have. And pride is what, is why that's why Satan fell also. And it's the opposite of Christ-like humility.
Right. Lowering self as exactly. Pride can make you fall, or you can choose. It's basically humiliation versus humility. Like today we see a lot of contrived humiliation. And I actually think that the impulse is wanting to seek humility, pure in its loving form, and that it ends up being contrived. So humiliation rituals, I think these are forced rituals that counterfeit actual humility, but it almost gets there. It gives you like maybe a piece of like oh, you're reduced and embarrassed by everybody, right? But embarrassment isn't the same as humility in God, in God's eyes. So these counterfeits are really interesting to see once you kind of grasp these terms, because you start to see all the kind of counterfeits, but then you're charitable because they come from a good place. They're actually seeking something good. And then it makes sense from that position. They're not just purely inventing.
Correct.
They're always taking, just like a lie needs to take the truth. They're always taking and then contorting it and making it to bend it to their will.
Which is what, if you bring it down to its core, is demonic. Satan was an angel of light, And so a lot of the times evil can be mainly cloaked in attractive beauty. But there's this little element in it. Once you try, if you can pray for discernment and achieve even some modicum of discernment, you start to hopefully see, wait a second, this mostly seems good. I think Elon Musk seems like he's on our side. Wait a second, there's just a little something there that's making me question this. And I think that's some of the times, if you can key in on that and try to understand what that little something is, can help you with discernment.
Right. And discernment requires that there's an actual objective paradigm, as opposed to like, I saw some insight. Like maybe there's a difference between an insight and discernment. Like you can have insights and they can be consistent with a broken paradigm, but still be insights. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But discernment in the sense, in the Christian sense, I guess, I don't know how you would distinguish that from an insight itself, from just another paradigm. But it seems that an insight is limited on its own, whereas discernment's kind of like maybe an ongoing practice where it's not just your intellect doing it, right?
Correct.
You're not just like, oh, I need to think about this stuff. And
correct.
Yeah.
It's almost the gut feeling inside you in a way, but rather than, because the truthers can have insight, because we did coming up through that world. There was insight, well, this seems wrong. If you kind of look at the story they're telling, well, my insight shows that that's a lie. So now I believe the real truth on this, although that falls back on Gnosticism, of course, as well.
Yeah, I know, because it's always self-referencing the intellect. So that's why people who are led just purely by their intellect and don't give over to some sort of authority and normative structure, they'll always be changing their positions because they're coming to new truths. And now post hoc, they look back and go, I was wrong about this truth. And I'm just constantly, it's just like science does.
So it's a scientific method.
Yeah, exactly. We're improving. You're basically doing the scientific method for spiritualism. But it's vague and ungrounded and incoherent. And again, any community that grows from it can grow in numbers, but it's not going to grow in it's not going to coagulate a truth and a praxis. It's going to be always changing. It's going to be not cohesive. It just ends up going, and then you start to realize, oh, that's why it produces people who say, do your thing, man.
Yes.
Because do your thing, man, is actually consistent with a ever-changing paradigm that's given by the intellect.
It's all good.
I'm past that, bro. I mean, it's great. Everyone has their own journey, which is, again, a half-truth. Everyone has their journey. But everyone has their journey doesn't mean there isn't a right road. And I think that gets confused a lot.
Yes.
Because the slogan itself, you could think, oh, everyone has their own journey. That just means there's as many roads as there are people. No, there's a map, right? If you didn't have the map, you wouldn't even be able to call something a journey. It would be meandering. It would just be crossing paths, circling. Someone's journey based on a baseless paradigm, their journey could be actually going in a circle. You saw that weird footage from like China where the sheeps are just going in a circle for like 80 days. I see that basically as Gnosis. That's basically what Gnosis looks like to me.
Yeah, it's appropriate that they were sheep as well in some sense. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking with I guess you would call it an agnostic friend of mine, and he had said, I appreciate what you've been able to find within the church and how it's helped ground you in a few ways in your life that you felt previously ungrounded. But it's not for me, and I almost feel that it's unfair because I don't have a playbook and you do. And it's like, as you say that, it doesn't even kind of click like, well, maybe that playbook's correct. But it's just strange when people see, I agree it works for you, it's working, I see these coincidences in your life, but that's just not for me.
It's back to the self as the ultimate arbiter. I would say, once you start practicing in a strict sense, in this case, Orthodoxy, there's anything I felt like an adverse reaction to my first time, my second time, my third time, I was very quick to properly isolate that as, me being the arbiter of all truth is making an arbitrary preference-based Yelp review of something.
That is huge.
And it's huge sense of humility. And a lot of people who are sort of the freedom movement go, oh no, you're just setting aside your reasoning. Well, in a sense, kind of. Well, that assumes that my reasoning is the ultimate arbiter. It's a begging the question. That's what's in an argument, right? That's like the whole debate with Owen, unfortunately, was not much about the Trinity from my position. It was actually about how you know things. It wasn't just an epistemic argument, but it's an ontological argument ultimately. But how you know things, once you reveal you take an arbitrary position that your reasoning is the thing that verifies your reasoning.
Yes.
My intellect verified my intellect, right? And it's got, by the way, it's no different than the self-reading solo prot who says, well, how do you know this is true? And they go, well, I'll just go back to the Bible and then I'll determine it. And then you go, well, how? And then they say, well, I'm led by the Holy Spirit. And then you go, how about two people who say that and they come to different answers? They say, well, we'll just do it another week or something. Like just give it a go. And again, it's the self-referential thing. And it's about Gnosis. I would say the sola scripturists of the modern day, even the ones who, this is what's ironic, the ones who reject the modern Christian view, but still do their methodology, I find is kind of hilarious, is that you reject the modern churches for all the right reasons, but then your methodology is the same as theirs, right? And you think that's going to lead you into something more fruitful as opposed to
fruity.
That this has already been revealed, and the only question is who best preserved it. There's only two. To me, there's only two options. It's Catholicism or Orthodoxy. That's the only two options I see historically. fundamentally, and that's the only debate really, and that should, I mean, in a way, that should be had, but unfortunately, we're born into a reformed culture that just like, oh yeah, no, you banish your kids when you go in, you send them just to the basement for Sunday school, where they don't adopt any or practice any culture. They don't light the candle and do any of the practices. They just color, and then daddy gets them after. And then you're like, did you learn what an arc was? And that's it. I that was very present with me as a lacking, because I always come back to practice. I mentioned 15 people arguing one God, Trinity God. And I just, if I ask them, with like over a loudspeaker, what do you guys practice? Do you think you guys could match up identical practices? And I think the answer would be no.
Let me, if you don't mind, if I could ask you, you said something just a few minutes ago. When I first went to the church, anything that would make me question it or kind of, I don't know, made your hair on your back or your neck stand up or something, like I told myself, wait, this is me kind of giving myself reasoned Yelp review. What were those things out of curiosity? Is it first coming, what did you think, like, this is different or weird?
Let's say just incense itself, just the smell, even though I didn't dislike it. I was like, I can't, because I couldn't theologically and biblically place it historically. Like, because I'm always asking like Posh these questions, like, the ongoing thing, like, it's normal for people to kind of be like, this is, these robes, like, what is it? Why? Right? Something like that. When you get into like asking the question of what's the purpose, the irony is that the purpose historically of the robes is actually not a celebration, as Posh told me, is a con-celebration. It's more actually to reduce yourself and unify yourself with something bigger through aesthetics. And so anything that kind of had a reaction, it wasn't even a good enough reaction for me to ever. It wasn't even a present enough reason other than a feeling like, I don't know. It's more like unfamiliarity. And then you protect yourself from unfamiliarity. But I said on a previous stream, in this sweatpants culture, as I call it, a culture of convenience, anything in the ultimate informal world that we're in, anything formal will seem cult-like. Anything formal will be like, oh, but that's just programmed response, right? And so you have to learn to figure out what's a programmed Pavlovian response since childhood, since you were born, by the way. It's not like it's just something you got last week. It's from birth, you're in a modern world, in a sweatpants society. So anything that's transcendental, that's timeless, that's ancient, is going to be like, I don't get it, right? But I don't get it's not a good enough reason, right? It's not a good enough reason. So, it was small things like that. It wasn't anything major. I have no issue with a lot of the things. In fact, a lot of people have a problem with sort of like iconography. I think that's one of the most beautiful and functional aspects of it. Not only that it focuses you, like the way it's placed focuses you to the focus, to Christ, to the actual sermon and everything that's happening. But even if you tuned away, you'd still be focused, right? It's not like a wall with a Starbucks sign or someone going like, Christ is, like one of these posters or something. Yes. And the other thing is that each of these icons have a meaning and a purpose even within the liturgy. So they're circulated for different purposes. It's not just like decoration and you had some cool artist paint Jesus stuff because it's cool. There's a use to it. Like these things, they represent specific historical moments in time as well as lessons. And I think that's one of the things you just will never get from these modern churches, where the connection you get at best is the preacher who's also a stand-up comedian on the side, right? Says some joke and you go up here. I totally get that. By the way, I loved your flute solo. And you know what I mean? And And the other thing I mentioned with the Machine Bear in the chat is that the consistency of the experience, it's very interesting that the overall the same thing is delivered, right? In the same way every time, and the sermons change and these things change and the tones change or whatever, but the actual structure of it never changes, and you get something totally different every time, right?
Yeah.
Out of it. No matter where you are in your life, the same person next to you could be going through something awful, and it still applies in a meaningful way because it's consistent. It's not tailored to what you're going through, which is different, by the way, because other churches, the modern church, will take a self-help approach. And if you take that approach, you have to psychologize, and you have to tailor. You have to say, like, this week we're going to be focusing on money.
Yeah.
I'm so glad they're finally doing a talk about money. It's like that could be embedded in the Orthodox service, but it's not tailored for that. You don't take trend topical things the way we do as streamers. We don't. It's not designed that we sift from the Posh would say epiphenomena. We don't grab from that and then insert it into the service, right? It's the same, 2,000 years of the same, and that's something I could see people have either going to seek that or they're going to run from it, right? And maybe there's a bunch in between. They're just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing.
For me, that was the transition that led me to it, and to a degree, I appreciated the old aspect of it, the ancient aspect of it, the exotic aspect of it. But I will say at first, it kind of hit me coming from a megachurch background, evangelical background. Interesting. The priest only spoke the homily for like 8 minutes. I'm used to hearing 45 minutes and laughing and modern jokes and takes on certain topics. And then I kept going back, and it's like, now it's hitting me. This is the same liturgy every single time. And whereas at first you kind of have to wipe your lens of modernity off, and once you do that and kind of fall into the beauty that is the liturgy, then I would not ever want to go anywhere else. It would just creep me out, or for lack of a better phrase, I just would not appreciate now going to a big box church and with gray walls and a cross here and there, and hearing the comedy routine from a TED Talk.
Yeah, and you might sift like some percent of the truth in you know what I mean, from that.
Certainly.
It's the difference is concentration. It's almost like you get the real green tea from the real source, right?
Yes.
And you're just like, it's dense, it's not diluted, it's potent, and almost overwhelming. That's why you weep a lot, right? That you're overcome with something.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to the other place, you're like, okay, good, this is good. I don't have to really deal with anything. I can still be in the world, right? I could still be, and that's the difference, right? You're
Correct.
still in the world. There's the good coffee bar in the front. You could always leave and get a coffee and check your phone and all this stuff. And that's not even present. Like, there's no modernity aspect. And there's maybe one person who's like wants to share what the beauty of it looks like. I'm even like, put your phone away. I'm like, I understand you want to like put this on, line and try to get people like but I'm even like, put that away. Like, this is not this is not Starbucks. And I think that's ends up being a massive difference between the experiences. So
yes. All right. I hope you enjoyed the chat, the discussion between Jimbob and myself. Like I said, he's really good. He does these live streams quite a bit. Go over to his YouTube channel and subscribe to it, and you'll get notified. Also, of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't yet already, and you get to see these weekly interviews. You get to see them rather than just hear them. So it's double the fun, all right? Until next week, see you guys.
You get split in fucking half, till I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.